I spent all my time just meeting with other agencies saying like, you don't want to build this. We've got a team that can do this. You'll look great. You'll own the client. We're just be in the background, like
Mm,
doing the
yeah.
work. Being an entrepreneur in Columbus or
Mm,
anywhere in the Midwest, really, we have to have a little bit of an attitude when we go and we compete against a venture-backed company that's based in Silicon Valley with a bunch of Ivy League PhDs, and MBAs driving the ship. That's when I'm like, that's
yeah.
not quite spike, but highly competitive, and like take
Mhm.
great joy in winning those. So I would say what inspires that competition is more what you and I talked about. Couple simple farm boys from the Midwest can be out here competing and
Mhm.
making a difference.
Welcome to Marketing by Design, where you and I learned from our favorite founders and marketers on how they built their success and told their stories by design. I am your host, Andy Milligan. Let's get started.
Grew up in a very small town, St. Mary's, Ohio. It's in West Central Ohio, truly the middle of nowhere. So there's really not, Lima's the largest city of any size. So very, very rural area. To this day, still very much like a factory and farming town. I grew up even like on the outskirts of that town. So I was even like rural for a rural area,
Mm,
single family home raised by my mother and with my sisters, Catholic school education, very, very small classes, very small community. And, I still go back there. My sisters are still there. Great community. There is definitely, small towns can be very insular. So the idea of going to like Columbus was a big deal. It was
yeah.
like another planet. So people tend to live their whole lives there, stay there. Most of the people I knew who had a college degree were teachers. So I really
Mhm.
didn't know what life could be like beyond this town. I had one friend, his parents both had journalism degrees. And so that was the closest I knew to something that wasn't either farm or factory work. So,
Mhm.
it was up until my senior year of high school, I thought I might just stay in St. Mary's. I was working at a restaurant. I had this idea I was going to be a bartender and live on the lake. And I like to write. So I had this idea like, oh, become an author. And
Mhm.
almost like a Hemingway-esque vision of like living on the lake in this small town and tending bar in the evenings. And that was kind of my aspiration. And it was very, one of a couple of times in my life when lightning struck, like those moments that fundamentally change your life course.
Mhm.
And I was in a study hall my senior year, May of my senior year, and my friend next to me was going to Bowling Green, was looking through the Bowling Green catalog, and he said, "Hey, aren't you this?" And it was a National Merit Scholar. I'm like, "Yeah, I did." I'm known. My best friends wouldn't tell you I'm brilliant. I'm not, but I was always really good at standardized tests. I could take standardized tests
Mm,
very well all the way through school. I always scored very well.
yeah.
So when it came to like the PSATs and those type of tests, I always scored very high, and I got national merit recognition. And again, in my town at the time, no one exactly my guidance counselors didn't exactly like tell me what that meant. And I didn't know what that meant. And my, family didn't really know what that meant. Well, I found in retrospect at that time, it meant you could go to pretty much any state school on a full ride scholarship. And I'm like, wait, I am. So I went home that night. I called Bowling Green. Again, this is May. So applications were long since done. And when I called Bowling Green and got a hold of someone and they said, well, you're a National Merit Scholar and you're not planning on going to college, it's free. Like you can go in any state, room, board, tuition, everything. So long story short, I drove up to Bowling Green a few days later, got in, went to school there. And that really then, as a journalism major, because again, that was the only degree I knew existed.
Yeah.
Um, and then I graduated in 1997, which was the year journalism and newspapers started dying because
Mhm.
of the internet.
For
So
sure.
graduated with a degree and I did some internships at newspapers and I knew I wasn't a great journalist. I just, I failed. I wasn't good at it. It wasn't like something I was, could see making a living doing. But the blessing was at the same time with the decline of journalism, websites were popping up and no one knew who was supposed to write content for websites. So all these companies were hiring journalists. So I
Mhm.
have many, many peers my age who went to digital marketing, technology, building websites because those journalism skills transferred to.
I know exactly how it feels to lose a job in marketing. Once upon a time, before founding an agency, I was laid off in a 60-person open floor office. I had to walk the floor, shake hands, collect phone numbers, all while bawling my eyes out. Now, this was 3 years ago, and that feeling still sticks with me to this very day. I know this feeling, and because of it, I built something just for you. Columbus Marketing Jobs is a free weekly newsletter with curated job postings from across Ohio with behind the scenes context that doesn't always make it into a job description. A lot of marketing opportunities never actually make it to job boards. They never actually make it to LinkedIn. I've learned firsthand attending hundreds of events, conferences, and private coffees building my business right here in Columbus, Ohio. If you're a marketer tired of being the last person to hear about a perfect fit opportunity right near you, or if you're a freelancer, always looking for the next client project, or if you're a CMO or fractional who has experience, who has expertise, and you're looking to get back into the game, Columbus marketing jobs exist to close the gap between these conversations and the people who should actually be a part of them. I want to give Columbus marketers a seat at this table. It's a free newsletter, always will be. You can find that in the first link below. Back to the podcast.
Writing, designing, and building
Yeah.
websites.
I think even um I want to go a little bit more back to your
Sure.
story. So your mother or was anyone in your childhood entrepreneurial when you kind of in those early
Yeah, that is
chapters?
a fabulous question. So I always heard tales. I never knew him, but my mother's father, so my maternal grandfather, who I never knew, he passed away very young. He owned a grocery store, again, in rural Northwest Ohio, and the family always talked about it, and my
Mhm.
mom talked about that's where she grew up making change and delivering before, the days of DoorDash, she would deliver groceries on her roller skates. And
Mhm.
so there was always this idea of entrepreneurship that got stuck in my head.
Mhm.
And I think if we walked down High Street here and we saw 10 people and said, have you ever thought of owning your own business? I bet 9 of them would say yes. Like
Yeah.
at some point, everyone goes to a restaurant and thinks, I could do this, or they have a bad customer service experience and think, oh, I could do this better. So most people, I think, have that interest. And I definitely had that interest. And I would even watch like the businesses in my town. And my senior year, again, when a friend and I talked about, we should start an ad agency and we should,
Mhm.
so I would say I've always had an interest in entrepreneurship, even growing up, probably that family legend of, my grandfather who had this
Mhm.
business, um, was always planted there. And then even going to college, pursuing this degree, thinking that that's what I would do for a living, that, journalism, what I would do for a living. But I always had, when I would have time to think, I always like imagined myself trying to build a business.
Mhm. Do you do you feel like you were ever, and the reason I ask is not because of anything you've told me so far, but I just feel like in a lot of high performers, a lot of founders that I've gotten to meet, they always feel like they're trying to live to, some of them at least, try and feel like they're trying to live to a standard that someone else set for them, whether it's their parents or any like early influence. They felt like they're they had something that they had to live up to. For my example, I have a very high performing like older sister, very top of her class, valedictorian, everything. And here I was like 2 years behind her, middle of the pack in
Yeah,
school, not the best athlete. She's killer volleyball athlete. And I always felt like, and my parents wouldn't say this directly because they're the most supportive people ever, but I always kind of felt like I was like 2 steps behind. And I've also found that that kind of mentality, when you feel like you're a little bit behind out of the gate, whether it's self-inflicted or not, can drive people
sure.
to be, to feel like they
Yeah,
started from behind
yeah,
and feel like they
yep,
want to achieve more. And I've also seen people who are just feel like they were just positively influenced the whole way. There's like, I'm motivated purely by being the best that I can possibly be. There's people that have gone through layoffs and they're like, man, I'm really motivated by spite now.
sure.
And that's driven me
Yes.
to incredible performances. Where would you feel like you fall on that spectrum? Where did you feel like you had expectations to live up to? Or were you just like a very internally motivated?
Those are all great observations, and I've seen all those. I would say my path was a little different. Part of it was growing up. Most of the people I saw were either factory workers or worked in agriculture. And frankly, I knew I wasn't very good at either of those. It's not that I,
Mhm.
didn't want to do it. It's like, I don't think I'm not a particularly handy person. I'm not, my wife cringes every time I tell her I'm going to go, fix the washing machine or something. So like those things are not things I'm gifted at. So I knew pretty early on, like I got to do something else. And
Mhm.
that's part of why it's like waiting tables young and then bartending. It's like, okay, I like talking to people. It's social. So that's like, okay, maybe that's what I'm going to do instead. And then of course it turns into maybe someday I'll buy this restaurant or own this restaurant. So
Mhm.
it turned into some entrepreneurial thoughts. So I would say that was a little bit of a driver. I think once I got into the workforce though, it was always it's similar to what you're saying, but it was almost more of like I had such a deep admiration for the founders and CEOs I worked for. And they looped me into conversations early. They involved me in stuff. And I was thinking, I want to do what they're doing. I would watch them, I
Yeah.
would learn from them, and an admiration. The layoff and the spite, I see this especially now. We're seeing huge layoffs, especially maybe some senior level folks, and they're out there, they're hanging out their shingle, they're doing their own thing. My version of that is probably more, I spent my whole life in Ohio, my whole entrepreneurial career in Columbus. Columbus is very different than it was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
But I think in the Midwest and in Ohio and in Columbus, we have a little bit of a chip on our shoulder because we still see, all the money and attention going to the coast. We see,
Mhm.
New York, California, Boston. And so I think being an entrepreneur in Columbus or
Mm,
anywhere in the Midwest, really, we have to have a little bit of an attitude. And so, when we go and we compete against a venture backed company that's based in Silicon Valley with a bunch of Ivy League PhDs, and MBAs driving the ship, that's
mm.
when I'm like, that's
Yeah.
not quite spike, but highly competitive and like take
Mhm,
great joy in winning those. So I would say what inspires that competition is more what you and I talked about, couple simple farm boys from the Midwest can be out here competing and
mhm.
making a difference.
Yeah, I love that. That's like a shared kind of underdog mentality rather than because I mean, I see it a lot of times as entrepreneurship can be very lonely, especially to people who feel like it's their responsibility to do everything. I like the mindset of it being kind of like a shared underdog mentality rather than it's me against the world
Right.
sort of thing.
Yeah, I'm sure you've seen this in Columbus. People will take meetings with you. People,
Mhm,
when I first started, I didn't know any better. I was reaching out to highly influential people in, government and investing and these leaders that have done
mhm.
multiple exits. And here I am, someone that didn't know anybody, had no success, and they would take the meetings. And even now, there are many companies in Ohio, in Columbus, in the Midwest that could be our competitors. But when they pop up or I pop up or we run into each other, it's we'll call each other and say, we can compete, and in which case we drive our costs way up and drive our profits way down, or we can collaborate and we both
Yeah.
win. So you see that, I think, a lot. This phrase, the Columbus way. I think it's true. Like
Mm,
I know it's true because I've had the conversation with other entrepreneurs where we could easily be competitors and cut each other's throat and bankrupt each other, or we could work together and both win.
yeah.
I don't think every city's like that. I
Yeah.
think there's definitely a culture of collaboration, and sometimes I'll do that. Now I'll call someone that's a would be competitor in another city, someone I recently met at a trade show, and it's like I saw what she was doing, loved it. I've reached out to her. And it's very much a no, we're competitors. We're not going to talk to you. She
Yeah.
slammed that door pretty quickly. And I don't think you see that as much in Columbus.
100% agree. Man, I so much what you just said. Like this truly like a battle of generosity. I started, I feel like very similar to you. And I had no, and looking back on it, it's cringeworthy for me just because I'm more recently removed from it. But like, for example, Lacey Picasso,
Hmm.
someone that I got an introduction to very early while I was still at the agency. Like, I think she's episode like single digits of this
Wow.
podcast.
Nice.
Um, and I had no idea. I was like a bit early on in my journey to where I could be helpful to her and
Yeah.
ask really good questions. But I mean, truly just and I look back at the people when I first started, people who just had nothing to gain and they're
Yeah.
just still so generous with their
Yeah.
time. And that is one of the things that motivates me the most now is like, when can I be in a position to where I can be someone if I see myself and someone that's, early on in their journey, what I could be to that person, like all the people
That's
who
great.
were that for me,
Yeah.
Um, one thing I wanted to touch on that I didn't want to breeze over that you said, was there anyone early like that entrepreneurially for you? You mentioned someone who really motivated you early on. Do you have any names that come to mind in terms
Sure.
of people you want like role models that you wanted to be like?
Yeah, absolutely. In Columbus, these are all recognizable names. So Carol Clark was the first, CEO I worked for that really gave me a seat at the table. She brought me into conversations I had no business being in. I was, 22, 23 years old. This was at the time when um, fundraising was still pretty early in Columbus. There wasn't, we didn't have Drive Capital and some of the other investments you had then. So that company, which was DPEC and became Mind Leaders, was a pretty big deal. Like there were not a lot of companies that were raising money that were Silicon Valley ish.
Yeah.
We had pool tables and ping pong tables and beer on Fridays. And so it was a very different for Columbus culture. She's still a good friend to this day. She's an advisor. We see each other quite frequently. So I would put her, and she's done more for the angel community in Columbus and Ohio than probably anyone. She
Hmm.
supported countless startups, not just with advice, but with funding. And then I worked for Mike Morgan, who, Updocs fame and has had some other great success in healthcare tech. Same thing, became a personal friend, involved me early in conversations that I had no business having a seat at the table. Has been an advisor, just to this day, good friend. And then the third is Pamela Springer. That was the company that brought Drive Capital here. That was when EC Next became Manta. Those folks that I met there are still, again, good friends. I lean on her when it's a really, really sticky problem I just cannot solve. She's a phone call away. There's nothing that I will run into that she hasn't already solved successfully. So leaning on her. And so, being mentor. I bet if you ask anyone, at least within my generation, the top 10 best CEOs in Columbus, those three are going to be on almost everyone's list. And the fact that I worked for all three, that all three took the time to spend time with me when there was no reason to me, that's as good as an MBA anywhere. The having that mentorship and leadership from people that are that good at what they do has just been such a blessing.
Hey, real quick, this episode is brought to us by our friends at Cohatch. I have a quick story to tell you. A while back, I realized I was recreating this bizarre little cave at home where I ate, slept, and worked out, all within the same 300 square feet. I was getting distracted by everything: pets, YouTube, laundry, food. Okay, I'm joking a little bit on the food one, but the refrigerator was right there, so not really. If you're a founder, a marketer, or a solopreneur, your revenue is directly tied to your effectiveness on the job and your output. You don't notice how much of a role a bad environment plays in your productivity until it starts to sink, and your revenue follows slowly behind it. I had come across Cohash at a ton of networking and community events as I was right here in Columbus, Ohio, building my business. When I finally invested in a membership, that is when things flipped for me. My ideas felt bigger again. I felt like I was showing up for other people. I felt cleaner, sharper, and honestly, just happier. When you're making a bigger impact in your business, your clients are happier, and your perceived happiness with your own existence, your own business, skyrockets. The best part is that the only distractions at Cohatch are other high-performing people, and that is the good kind of distractions, the kind that leads to partnerships, conversations, and new ideas that propel you forward. If my little environment of doom pattern sounds familiar to you, Cohatch might be the exact shift that you need in your business and your life. They've actually been generous enough to offer you, as a Marketing by Design podcast listener, 2 full free weeks. I would have killed for this when I first started, guys, but they're giving it to you 100% for free. That is why I love Cohatch. That is why I'm a huge advocate of everything they are. They're not giving this deal out anywhere else, so I highly encourage you to head down to the description, grab that for yourself, and back to the pod. Yeah, and that's so good. This is going to skip ahead a little bit in terms of the things I wanted to ask you, but in terms of the people that you look, because you've hired a lot of people, you've seen so many people, you've met so many people. When it comes to the people that come to you for work, or that traits that you see desirable in the people that you want kind of acting out your vision, what do you look for in the people that you hire, or what can you see in people that you see to be high performers or accomplish the vision that you can set forth? Because I've seen, we're starting to hire now too, and that's
Great.
why it's a bit of a
Great.
selfish
Nice.
question.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah.
But and I'm learning as I go, 100%. But I see people who are very jumping the gun, very aspirational. They echo all the words that you say, but then, and you have nothing but the highest hopes. You're just like, man, this is perfect. And then it doesn't. I'm a huge believer, is kind of how probably you and I were both raised, is the Jocko Willink idea of extreme ownership. It's either I didn't communicate this properly, or there's something that I did wrong in the process to take it to go this way. And I've also met incredibly high performers that are don't live up to that mindset at all. They're they find any way for this to not be their fault. And I think when it comes to hiring, there's really only one person to blame, and it's the person who didn't communicate the role effectively,
Right.
But that's kind of a tangent. But
Yeah.
when it comes to the people that you want to work with, that is yes, this person is perfect. What are some of the traits that you are on the lookout for?
Yeah, that's great. So we have 4 core values. They're on the wall of the office. It is how we hire, it's how we promote, it's how we fire. Everything is really built around those. I think most companies have core values, but I think a lot of times they sit in a handbook and the employees couldn't tell you what they are. They don't really become part of the culture. So my philosophy is, you and I and everybody listening now, there's 10,000 traits that make us up, right? If someone were to do an AI map on each of us as human beings and include our hobbies, our favorite foods, our interests, our political leanings, all that stuff, let's say they found 10,000. My philosophy is to work at Futurety. We can be very different on 9,996 of those things. We can be different ages. We can be different genders. We can have different political beliefs. We can have different hobbies. We can be raised differently, different nationalities. But these 4 things we have to agree on, and they're non-negotiable. And if we don't agree on those, you're not going to be happy here, and other people are going to be happy working with you, and the system's going to break. And so it's a very deliberate exercise. As the founder, you have to influence those a lot, because it's ultimately, like you said, the buck stops with you. If there is a bad hire, it's not that hire's fault. you as the founder, even if you didn't interview them, because somewhere in the system you did something not right to let
Mhm.
that in.
Yeah.
So I'll touch on them briefly. I could eat up the whole podcast on these. It's one of my favorite topics. So the first thing I would say is that a good core value, it shouldn't be a universal truth. So, don't steal is not a good core value because you should just not steal.
Mhm.
A good core value should be something that the you could argue the opposite thing and you would still be a good person. So one of ours is
Yeah.
be accountable and trust, meaning that it's just kind of what you just said. Like I think it's very much the Midwestern blue collar Gen X German Catholic. When anything goes wrong, I blame myself. If it's
Yeah.
raining too hard, and
Mhm.
my street floods and I end up like getting water over my pants, it's my fault because I didn't like bring an umbrella or didn't park in the right place. Like everything
Yeah.
that happens, I tend to blame myself. I don't think you have to be that extreme, but the idea like you are accountable for when things go right or wrong, and
Yeah.
you've got to own that, and you have to trust other people are going to be accountable. That means if you and I work together, and we have worked together on projects, you probably didn't get an email from me every week saying like, "Hey, Andy, how's that website coming?
Yeah.
Hey, Andy, is that form fill really going to work? Did you test the form fill?
Yeah.
Because I trust you've tested that form fill over and over." I work with wonderful people, wonderful partners who I would never ever hire because their core value, whether they would say it out loud or not, is double and triple check everything. And if you are a surgeon or if you're an HVAC repair technician or you're a car mechanic or you're a pilot, your core value should be double and triple check everything,
Yeah.
over and over and over, double and triple check. For us, it's the opposite of if Andy shows me that form's going to work, and I'm not going to ask him if it's going to work. So there are people that I work with that are more like partners, contractors, consultants. It's like, yeah, the great consultants, they could never be an employee here because they're good people, but that's a difference. The other one is relentless forward movement. That means stuff happens, stuff gets in your way, and you just keep walking forward. So whenever we find ourselves like wanting to sit still because we can't get access to that data set or because people are concerned about broader macroeconomic terms or that key hire we wanted just, took a job somewhere else, like then you immediately call the next person on the list. It's the idea like,
Yeah.
no feeling sorry for yourself, no beating yourself up, you just move forward.
Mhm.
Other people may say like, always be retrospective and always take time. And that's not us. It's like, nope, forward, forward, forward.
Hmm.
Again, great people I've met. And I can tell in the interview, this is going to be someone that's going to want to like sit and pause at each of those steps. And those are great at many organizations. They're the right thing for us.
Hmm.
Relationships around the world. That's, you and I are proof to that, right? You spend a lot of time with good people. You never burn a bridge. You're kind to people. I think there's this sometimes zeitgeist and broader capitalism that it's, kill or be killed, crush the competition, no mercy. Our philosophy is very much just keep building relationships and eventually, you know, good things will happen. And then challenge yourself and others. Just always be learning, always be growing. Again, I say the church I go to, the motto there is you are enough. And that's right for that church. And that's absolutely what the space you should be in when you're in prayer at a pew on Sunday morning. When you're in the office, though, the opposite of that is like, now I got to push myself a little harder. Like I got to
Yeah.
close one more deal. I got to solve one more complex problem. I've got to figure out how we're going to do this in a compliant manner. So it's always, push, push, push. So those are the four things we look for. If we interview someone and they're only 3 or 4, they don't get the job. When we look to promote people to leadership roles, it's because they excel not just at the tactical skills in their job, but excel at those 4 things.
Mhm. Yeah. So good. I mean, how early on? Because I reflect back on my own. Like I said, I'm learning every day. To probably a lot of the listeners too, who maybe are freelancers or they're in house, they're like, man, like Bill, I don't have my constitution, like 4 values written out. Like, am I doing something wrong here? How early did you have those priorities and how firm were you on the beginning? Or did you have a situation like my sister, like I have people who I love and they'll call me out, like they'll call me out on things that I'm not doing right. It's very helpful, but it's also, it can be frustrating sometimes. But was there like a story or a happenstance where you're like, man, we need to have something that we can reliably source of truth, like fall back on when it comes to making these decisions like hiring or other internal moves within the company?
Right. I think I was first exposed to the idea. So a previous company I had, Web Marketing, we were acquired. The company that acquired us was very, very focused on their core values. And so it was the thing that really caught my attention. That's the first time it really got onto my radar. I think before they were implied with the other companies I'd worked with,
Mm.
and I could probably, you know, kind of assume what they were before, but that was really what got it on my radar. And then I just spent a lot of time thinking, and I suspect you're the same way. Those moments when you're like mowing the grass or in the gym or fishing in a river, those moments where you're like, I would have that conversation in my head, like, what are my non-negotiables? What are the
Yeah.
things that matter to me? So it was that first exposure to those core values, which did not align with mine. Like they were great for the organization, but I didn't stick around long because of that. Like
Mhm.
their core values didn't match mine. So it forced me to ask myself, what are mine? And then with any company, with growth with Futurity, we made hires that did not work. We made a few hires that were catastrophically bad and
Mhm.
really hurt the organization. And I would sit and think like, man, this person on paper, they could sell or they could code or they knew digital marketing, they knew data. So what went wrong that
Mhm.
it was so damaging to us? And spending some time with our senior leadership team, we really looked at, oh, these people had these things in common, or they didn't align with us on this.
Mhm.
And so it was an exercise. We did it collaboratively. We whiteboarded out our leadership team. We came up with the key topics. We bundled them into these 4 ideas. And I can say since then, retention at organizations like Futurities, there tends to be a lot of churn at
Mhm.
consulting
Yeah.
firms, agencies, especially in our size range. So the numbers vary, but it's huge. So we have retention. It's one of our 6 KPIs. I hope I can remember the other 5 if you ask me in a bit. But every month we report on 6 KPIs that everyone in the company is responsible for influencing. And one of those is employee retention. And it's always very, very high. At this point, we almost never lose a team member. And when we do, a lot of times it is, and this is just, it's happening right now. Someone will tell me 9 months in advance, like, hey, I see where I'm growing. I see where the company's growing. I want to start thinking about other stuff. And in many cases, I will say, great, I'm going to make some introductions for you.
Mhm.
I'm not, it's not kicking them out the door. It's like, you're right. This is the point where the transition is best for you and it's best for the company. And we're going to make this happen well. We almost never now have a bad breakup or a bad
Yeah.
departure because every step of the process is meant to institute these core values.
Yeah. I think and not to speak for you, you probably had exposure to things that went wrong in the past, and it's like, touching a hot pan,
Oh, yeah.
I one thing you did say is that you mentioned kind of doing like once things go wrong, because when you mentioned one of the core values was like always moving forward, and then so someone might say like you had the retrospective afterwards when a hire went wrong or something like that, where you're like, okay, what went wrong? How can I think through it to make sure it doesn't happen again? I think it's like a productive habit, and I'm trying to get better at it too, is like the things that go wrong, you are retrospective about because you don't want them to happen again. Versus like versus when things go right or it's a huge big
Okay.
win, you don't reflect on those as much because then it's
Yeah.
counterproductive, Like it's just giving yourself credit for I mean, I think it can be productive in some cases, so I don't mean to be like draw a hard line in the sand, but I think would you agree it's more helpful to be retrospective when things go wrong in order to avoid them in the future, whether it is with hiring or a decision that you made or something that you invested in to take corrective action versus when something goes right, say, I just want to bask in the glory of
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. I think especially for folks like you and I, we're definitely wired that way. So I haven't
Mm.
thought about that question before, but I would say I'm definitely the person that will analyze what went wrong versus thinking about what went right.
Yeah.
If I put on my like machine learning data hat, I would say, no, you should train the machine equally on both.
Hmm.
If we were training a machine model to be the perfect CEO, you would reinforcement learn the positive as much as the negative.
Hmm.
But I think that's not how I'm wired. So I would
Right.
agree. I'm definitely wired much more to focus on what went bad. How do we make sure that never happens again? And when you make the same mistake 2 or 3 times, that's when, when you keep touching the hot pan,
Right. Yeah.
that's when, we meant to listen to a podcast. So I always laugh when I listen to the, I 90% is like high value history business. And I listen to like the terrible true crime ones as well.
Mhm.
And every time it's like, here's this woman who was a serial killer and she murdered her first 4 husbands. And the 5th guy's like, yeah, but I'm going to be the one she won't murder.
Yeah.
Like you keep touching
Yeah.
the hot pan, dude. Like, in
Yeah.
that case, you're not learning. So yeah, I agree. I think you're right. I think probably most entrepreneurs are programmed to avoid the bad versus like reinforce the good. And we should
Yeah.
probably think about that.
Yeah. I think the most helpful thing for me has been learning from people like ahead of me. I think we already talked about that in terms of some of your mentors and early influences, but it's just having like a combination of someone who there are very few people that you have the kind of relationship with where they're probably worried about it, but they will call you out when you're doing something
Right.
wrong. Just a couple weeks ago, it was a past episode. I had Casey Brown on the show, and she came up to me afterwards. She was like, "Can I share a perspective with you?" I was like, I was kind of taken aback. I
Yeah.
was like, "Oh yeah, of course." She goes like, "The way that you like always caveat yourself, the way that you are a little bit self detrimental. Like you say things like, someone smarter than me could probably explain this better, or, maybe I'll learn this one day a different way. She said like your brain doesn't know the difference when you're speaking in jest versus when you're actually trying to come across as humble. And that like really, really hit me. I realized like, and we have 140 episodes of the show now. So I have like constant data of like, man, I keep saying that over and over. So I'm a lot more conscious on things like that now. But what it's leading to is like, do you have anyone, maybe it's someone in your family or someone you've met entrepreneurially who you can rely on to call you out on things that you may slip under the radar, or that maybe has your best interest at heart, regardless of the emotions that might arise when they bring it up to you?
Sure. Yeah, I would say a few folks. So one, I mentioned this kind of network of founders I have worked with in the past. There are times I will call one of them, and it's funny. It goes back to your previous question to celebrate. Like, hey, you'll never guess what? We just closed this HUCKLE deal. We're getting, 42 cents a record, and it's this enterprise. And one in particular said, like, I thought your list price was 48 cents a record. You're right.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so it is, so it can be big stuff, but it can also be like tactical. So, that conversation, I know even when it's celebratory, it's something like that I really messed up on, then I definitely get that feedback. So I definitely have like those mentors that don't just, I would say, the mentors I mentioned are all really good at
Mhm,
like challenging me on what can do better.
mhm.
And, I have 3 kids and they're never impressed with what you do. So I will, the brutally honest feedback you get from your family, I think is helpful because
Mhm.
they know all sides of you. They know you better than anyone. So I will definitely, and a lot of it, what I do isn't like super interesting to my kids, but every once in a while it's like I'll meet someone that it's a brand they're familiar with, or it's,
Mm.
a person, an influencer that they know or something. So I'll share that with them. And a lot of times I'll get really, good, honest feedback from them as well.
Yeah.
My kids are all very different personalities, but my middle one is much more of a science STEM type kid. And so she looks at everything through the lens of like science and precision.
Mm.
And so I get some really, good, honest feedback from her in terms of,
Yeah.
how I do things. So
Yeah.
that's good.
In terms of, I'm the same way. I know we talked about my father a little bit the first time we met. He's a 30-year police chief in Heber Heights. Um, and it's it's hard to impress him. And that's a good thing. I think that's partly what one of my drivers was early on, because my and I don't mean to be like self introspective here, but I was always like trying to find something in common, like that could really
Yeah.
like, man, this is gonna make him proud. And he was always so supportive. Um, but even then, it's just like we're always looking to, especially with people. I think it's a sign that they're important to us. We just want their approval.
Sure. Yes.
Um, but something that I wanted to ask you is, what gets you excited to do what you do now? I mean, I think you reach, and I guess that I'm learning as I go here too, but where I feel like you reach a point where like we all, maybe a lot of our problems now, I feel like a lot of people in the country, human problems are self-inflicted to some extent. But when you've reached kind of like, and I know you never let your guard down, when you've reached a place in entrepreneurship and business to where you've reached a certain level of takeoff, you have a team, a lot of it is self-managed. What gets you excited to like push and grow to the next level? Is it the family still, or is it the opportunity to accomplish new and exciting things that you haven't done before? Like, what are some of the things that are exciting you now about
Yeah.
work?
Yeah. A lot of my day now is spent doing things like this. So I spend a lot of time with
Mhm.
other entrepreneurs, with peers, with mentors, with new talent that's, people, recent graduates, everyone. So to me, building those connections, being the kind of professional networker, is really rewarding. I start most of my days just like you and I did not long ago,
Mhm.
usually go get coffee with someone, a lot of times lunch meetings, happy hours. But the idea of like building those connections and then looking for connecting the puzzle pieces. So there's an
Mhm.
old board game I used to like called Tribon where you would get 3 seemingly unconnected things. You'd have to find out what they all had in common. I feel like that's what my day is like now. So I talk to my breakfast meeting, and then maybe I go sit on a client call, and then I meet with a new partner that night, and then a new grad the next day. And I'm like, oh, you know what we could do if we brought all this together. So
Yeah.
so building those connections and relationships, it's like a constant, New York Times puzzle game, but in real
Mhm.
life. So to me, like solving those puzzles, building that is fun. I
Yes.
love fast moving industries. So the fact that AI, the speed with which AI is moving now, it's a wonderful place to be in data and have been in data for as long as we have
Mhm.
because we're positioned now to do really creative, fun things.
Yeah.
Um, whatever industry I was in, I think I could enjoy it, but I've always been much more drawn to industries that don't ever change
Yeah.
or that change constantly. Sorry.
Yeah. Mhm.
My first job right out of school, very briefly, I worked for a large regional bank and I liked it. I had good mentors, good team. But even then, 21, 22 years old, I would think like, okay, these are my peers, and it's very hierarchical. I started as like junior assistant marketing coordinator, then moved to marketing coordinator, then senior marketing
Mhm.
coordinator. And no matter how good you were, there's someone that's been doing that job for 20 or 30 and 40 years, and they're always going to be better than you. And they're always going to, you're always going to be kind of following their footsteps and following their patterns and maybe making incremental changes on what they've done. Banking wasn't a super dynamic, fast changing industry. In
Mhm.
fact, I remember being told that they would never use the internet because people would never want to do online banking
Mm.
because at that
I
point, the
aged
internet was
well.
kind of like a weird, dark place that no one, real people didn't go for serious stuff. And then as soon as I went to a digital.com type company, right from that was my very next job, which was the other extreme where there was no playbook. I mean, it was every stereotype about the mid 90s of here's some money, here's a domain name, like figure stuff out. And my first job was like have us rank well on search engines. And this was a year before Google was founded. So search
Mhm.
engines were like Alta Vista and Yahoo. And so there was like no person 7 levels above me who I could go to do that. I would just try stuff on our website. And,
Yeah.
there were no controls. It's like I could just update our website whatever I wanted and put whatever words on it I wanted and just, and, it moved so fast. And that's when I did a lot of the public speaking. So pretty soon I was going to like New York, California, again at 20 some years old,
Mhm.
getting paid to speak at these national conferences because no one else in the world had been doing SEO longer than I had. I did it as soon
Yeah.
as it was an industry. And so that was such a rush. And I just never got over that. And now with AI, it's the same thing. Like, no one's been developing, uh, the kind of integrations with large language models as long as we have, because we've done it as soon as these were large language models to work with.
Right.
So I think being involved in just a constantly changing industry and at some point when this all slows down, I'll be looking for, okay, Futurity is going. And that's part of the inside joke with the name. Futurity is like
Mhm.
always being, what's the
Yep.
next big thing? And we're going to go do that as soon as we know about it. And we're going to be early to market and we're going to help everyone else figure it out. And
Mhm.
to me, that's very exciting.
Yeah. Have you ever, because that's, I mean, for probably a lot of more folks on the non-entrepreneurial side, that sounds like a very intimidating thing. It's like, I want to be, you know, I don't want to be the person that's like leading with the torch into the darkness. Like I think you've been, even in this like several chapters and pages throughout your career, early to digital marketing, SEO, early to the AI side. I mean, have you ever felt like you were out of place being like, because when you're the first one in the room to raise your hand and say
Right.
something,
Right.
like there's always, maybe this isn't, I mean, I think it's less so true for entrepreneurs, but there's always like, man, am I going to look stupid if I do
Yeah.
something wrong? Is there a time perhaps in your career where you were wrong about something that
Yeah.
you, not to make you look bad or
Oh,
anything,
yeah.
but where you were wrong about something that you placed your bets on and you maybe had to recalibrate? Did that teach you anything, or is there a story like that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I've been tragically, terribly, expensively wrong on a few things. Many, too many to list, but two of my favorite ones, or least favorite, however you want to say it. One was 2006. Had this idea we're going to fractionalize content. Today, everybody's doing this. You see fractionalized content. There's a million companies doing this.
Hmm.
But the idea was, let's start with what's the big problem? What's a big block of content that no one really needs all of? College textbooks. So that was my idea. 2006. We're going to go to college textbook publishers. This is when they were all paper based. We're going to put them online, and you just buy the sections or pages or chapters you need. And
Hmm.
I had just come off of being a poor college student, paying
Hmm.
$300 a book that I didn't have for a book I would only use a few pages of, or maybe never.
Yeah.
And then you sell it back for pennies. So I'm like, we're going to solve that. It was called Renaissance U. So my first mistake was naming it a word no one can spell because no one can spell Renaissance.
Yeah.
Um, and then I actually signed a deal with a book publisher. I don't know why they signed with us. I mean, there was no business model to speak of, but I think they were just enamored by being innovative. Found a designer, found a instructional designer, a graphic designer, a college professor. We built like a rough team. We went out there and tried to do this, and a few like big flaws. One is, there were no iPads at that point, and there were very few people even had laptops. So most people were on desktop computers, which were terrible to read on. E-commerce wasn't really set up well to buy the chapters. Building stores was not an easy thing to do. And so, it failed. We didn't have a single sale. Failed badly, but learned a lot. And then the second one was right before COVID. I got into telemedicine. And this again was terrible timing because at that point, telemedicine wasn't covered by most insurance companies. People didn't really know what it was. There was not widespread acceptance. And that one was an expensive, that was a very costly endeavor. Signed a few contracts, but still never really made any money off of it. COVID hit and suddenly everyone was using telemedicine, adopted. So, shuttered the doors of that company probably just a few months before COVID hit. That was kind of done in tandem with some of the Futurety stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, two big fails, but there's been a dozen other smaller ones along the way.
Well, still, even to me, like I hear that, and I think we all have a front row seat of like our own shortcomings. So like removed from that, I hear ideas too early to be effective. Like you were ahead of like ideas that were ahead of their time. I think you still just have like a really good self awareness on, because I even hear, and I wanted to ask you your perspective on like higher education now and where that ties with entrepreneurship because I have heard a lot of differing opinions.
Sure.
But like even I hear that and they both sound like good ideas, just not in the right context, So double clicking on that, like what is your perspective on higher education nowadays? I know you have children who
Sure.
they've been through college, right?
Right.
I look back at and I'll give a short personal
Sure.
anecdote. I went to, I think, especially in this neighborhood, like college is always viewed as like the only option. That was in my household. Not like the only option, but it was like the gold standard. That's what you're striving
Right.
towards. And if I look back at my journey now, I started in Fayetteville, North Carolina, Methodist University. Then I transferred to University of Findlay where I graduated. And I made a lot of amazing relationships. I grew a ton as a person. But I look back and I'm like, man, if I could do this again, I feel like I would just go to community college and work,
Right.
and just try something on my own, fail, get the bruises early. If I know, and I would have thought that someone like you would really encourage, and I'm sure you did, you currently encourage entrepreneurship with your children. What do you think are the way the world is now? I think it's very case dependent, obviously. But what are your thoughts on the current like job ecosystem / going to college versus not? And what would you encourage people to maybe do self-exploration wise to know what's right for them?
Yeah. I like simple answers, and this is not going to be simple because I have so many like conflicting inputs on this. So one, as a hiring manager, as someone who's watching the macro economy, I believe this is the worst economy for new graduates and interns in my life. Worse than '08. I truly believe that. I have not an exaggeration. I think I'm up to 20 people now, either new grads or interns or parents of them, because I'm at the age now where most of my friends have kids in college that I've met with that have sent me resumes since the first of the year. So in less than a month, one a day, very close to that. I'm hearing from folks not finding jobs. There was a time you mentioned the gold standard when I would have told anyone with some, technical proclivity, like go to school, get a computer science degree. You'll have more offers than you could choose from. You'll make 70 grand your first year.
Yeah.
And then you can figure stuff out from there. I wouldn't say that anymore because I see it's the first time in my career I've ever seen unemployed developers. So I think my first statement is I think it's the worst market for new grads I've ever seen. And I don't see any like indicators that it's going to get better soon. At the same time, we're living in this K-shaped economy where tremendous wealth is being generated. The stock market's at another all-time high today, I think, more billionaires than ever. At the same time, then we have like a downward, kind of Main Street inflation and joblessness and things like that. So I think it's complicated. I also serve on the board of Franklin University, which I think very much aligns with where education is heading. So it is ran in a way that our students are getting a good education, very career focused. You're not going to football teams, you're not living in the dorms, you're not going to meet your future spouse there. But if you want to go and with very little to no debt, graduate and get a great job, things like Franklin University, things like Columbus State, I think are great opportunities for you. And I won't make this a Franklin commercial, but Franklin and schools like that, the faculty all work in their professions. So not only are you getting that experience and real world perspective, you're also building a network and you're connecting with people. So job placement at those type of universities are very, very high. So I do think we're seeing a shift there. If you look at what's happening in Ohio and beyond, 4-year liberal arts, smaller universities without endowments, we're losing them. We're losing them every single year. More and more shuttering. You and I know some from your neck of the woods. So they're not thriving. They're not surviving. They're not going to make it. We're going to keep seeing that trend. That I'm 100% sure of. You're going to see fewer 4 years, small liberal arts schools, unless they've got a big endowment they can ride this out on. And at the end of that, I still don't see, I
Right.
don't see what's going to change. There's kind of always the joke about the philosophy major who, will be unemployed now in the days of AI. It's like, well, people are actually looking at some degrees like that.
Yeah.
But I would still say, there is a shift to that type of education. My other conflicting view then, as someone who had a great college experience, and I went to Bowling Green, so again, not like a, Ivy League, didn't go far away,
Mhm.
probably the closest school I could have gone to. You know, my wife and I met at Bowling Green. The person who's my best friend today, he was my college roommate. My a lot of my network, one of our consultants who I work with to this day, she was in the same major as I was. On the nonprofit I serve on, several people there from BG. So what you get the relationships and
Mhm.
the connection and the feel with the alma mater is there's value in that is not just about your career. Like your father, my son's a police officer. He went to school in Bowling Green, got a degree, decided it wasn't for him, went to police academy.
Mhm.
But in his college experience, same thing. His wife's a BG grad. All his buddies were a BG grad. He played in a band. He got to do all that stuff that I think will form him as a human being. So I would say schools like Franklin that are focused on career, schools like Bowling Green that are very efficient, provide that college experience. I think there's a future there. I think there's much less of a future for your more, 4 year liberal arts type
Mhm.
of schools. And I think it's unfortunate because I think they provide a lot of value, but I think the world is changing and it's not going back.
Yeah. You're so good at providing an insight that isn't like stake in the ground, but also like not over caveating yourself. There's a lot of people who are like, and I've probably on some of the bigger podcasts like Diary of a CEO,
Oh, yeah.
Modern Wisdom, things like that, where you know exactly what they're going to say because it's just going to be, I'm not going to take a firm stance on either side,
Yeah.
But you're very good at like
Yeah.
providing context as to why you
I
say things.
appreciate that.
So
That's one of the topics I'm most conflicted on because looking at like as a parent, as a trustee, as someone who hires, like I'm getting just mixed messages all
yeah,
around what will happen in higher
yeah,
ed. So it's what I'm probably the most conflicted on.
yeah. Well, no, I think it's like just like you said, like very case dependent. I mean, I 100% agree on Franklin. That's why like I got to again like very early days before I was like um far along in my journey to really know what was going on. Obviously, hindsight's 2020. But I was in a networking group to where one of the his name was Bob Sievers. Just recently passed away actually, but he was a digital marketing professor at or he was in the marketing department at Franklin University, and he did evening. He had an evening class, and he offered for me to guest lecture at it.
Oh, that's great.
When I was 22.
Wow.
And I was like, I was sweating bullets, Bill. Like I
Yeah.
was like,
Oh, yeah.
college, like what the hell?
Yeah.
Um, and it was like totally contrary to like my entire college
Uh-huh.
experience. Like this is awesome. Like this is like we're it's like a round table. We're
Oh,
all
yeah.
pitching ideas.
Yeah.
And it was like this is college. And I graduated about the same time that the whole everything was moving online. So my college experience was a little bit nerfed from that
Yeah.
standpoint. But I agree, it's just so case dependent. I mean, even today, like I even see people who are so there's always more opportunity today than yesterday. Like it's so easy to start a business
Yeah.
now and
Yes. Yeah.
find like a very niche
Yep.
market,
Yep.
especially with AI. Like you
Yep.
can learn things so fast. You can get a whole college tuition if you
Absolutely
just have
right.
the dedication to stick with the curriculum on your
Mhm.
own. But that again is like the people side of it is where I see a lot of people like my age and slightly below is like lacking. Like
Yeah.
they can't hold a lot of
Yeah.
them can't build their relationships, have a really good conversation and have like a people first mentality. Like from it's so weird because that's like what was really valued in traditional times and now it's like being lost, I
Yeah.
feel like. Um and I mean the one thing I really want to ask you about is I've asked a lot of like people, entrepreneurs, people who are a couple steps ahead of me, like, what is the most valuable and leveraged use of your time, like when you first get started for
Mm.
listeners, like they just started
Yeah.
entrepreneur pursuit. And I'm like, in my head, I feel like it's okay. It's work 18 hours a day,
Yeah.
you know, be very grind 100%. And all of them said something to the tune of just be people first,
Yep.
send 5 emails a day to your
Yep.
past network, show up for people, go first
Yep.
proactively. They've also something tuned to that, and I'm like that's it. Like that's the
Yeah.
magic sauce. Um, but if you like, what have you seen to be like some of the most leveraged actions, of your career? Is it the
Yeah.
building relationship side, or is it something that we haven't touched on?
It's absolutely relationships. I'll go back to the web marketing. So my first business back in '06, digital marketing, social media, which today is very cliche, right? That's a very commoditized service. In '06, between New York and Chicago, we had almost no competition. And we were just,
Mhm.
we couldn't, every day you woke up and you rolled the dice was a seven. Like we just couldn't lose. It
Yeah.
was one of those like rare times, hockey stick growth. But the reason for that growth was I spent all my time working with other agencies, traditional marketing agencies that were great at TV and radio and film and print and billboards, but had no idea how to do digital and didn't know if they should build it because they weren't sure if it was going to stick around. And so my days were spent just meeting with them, pitching every agency that would take a meeting with me. And what happened was there was a point in Ohio that, 2008, 2009, we used to say all roads lead to web.
Mm.
Anyway, a large regional bank issued this RFP. Everyone in the state wanted it. There was a big digital component. Essentially, everyone that bid on it had us as the sub for the digital piece of it. So they were all
Mhm.
pitching their own TV, radio, print, all the other stuff. But no matter who won, like we won. And that became a trend where
Mm.
we were baked in. And that was because, not because I was good at SEO, not because I was good at social media, not because I understood Google ads. It's because I spent all my time just meeting with other agencies saying like, you don't want to build this. We've got a team that can do this.
Mhm.
You'll look great. You'll own the client. We're just be in the background, like
Mm.
doing the
Yeah.
work. Same thing with Futurity. And I knew I wanted to start a business. I took math pass fail in college. So I cannot do basic data analytics work. I have no idea how to do that work.
Mhm.
So I went out and I met with my network, exactly what your mentors and advisors tell you. And I said, what's one thing you would pay me to do for? What would you, I want to start another business. What can I solve for you? So I didn't pitch them and say, here's what Futurity is. I'm like, you tell me what Futurity is. What would you write me a check for? And
Mm.
three or four of them said, and keep in mind, this is 2014, well before the days of Chat GPT or any kind of, or like great visualization tools that
Yeah.
were easy to use. They said, we have a bunch of data and all this places. It's contradictory. It doesn't talk to each other. We want one source of truth, one dashboard that shows all of our data. And I can't write a line of code. Like I said, I couldn't engineer it. And I said, okay, that's what Futurity is. Because by the time the third person said that, I said, that's what Futurity is. So
Mhm.
I went out, my wife's a gifted math teacher. So she actually came on and built up her job for a couple of years. I went to Ohio State, found a couple really smart grad students to do some of the work. And then after a few years, made the first hires. But it was really just my time was spent saying like, what's the market want?
Mm.
Even today, we have a president, I'm CEO. We have a president and I tell him the way we split our responsibilities. If we go bankrupt tomorrow, it's his fault. If we go bankrupt in 6 months, it's my fault. Because my job is to spend all my time doing stuff like this, saying, what's going to happen in 6 months?
Yeah.
This is what's going to happen in 6 months.
Yeah.
And then like, let's make sure we're working on that. You don't learn that sitting in your cubicle at your office. You learn it by talking to
100%.
people.
Yeah. 100%. So you're very, very, I mean, that's our job. It's like finger on the pulse, right? Um, have you ever read Who Not How by Benjamin Hardy?
No, no.
Highly, highly
Okay.
recommend.
Okay.
But it's 100% what you just said. I think a lot of people, and I was very much this way if I'm being introspective, and I think it's uniquely true of creative people. Um, People who kind of get stuck in like the tactical, like old way of doing things. But the very early days when I was at the agency, I viewed people who were better than me as like kind of like competition. Like I would always be
Oh, okay.
comparative. I was always in a mindset where like, man, they are better than me, you know? But when you start to realize that, and I was kind of similar to what you said. The first year of business, got I got involved with an internship program, and I got a kid from Dublin. His name is Liam, and like that was before like pre-revenue where I could afford to have an assistant or an employee. And the most technically smart person ever, like
Nice.
developer, back
Nice.
end, junior in high school,
Wow.
and he was working for me 8 hours a week for free. And I was like, that was my first realization. That's what Who Not How talks about. Like,
Okay. Okay.
I have now like adopted the skill
Yeah.
set of someone who, without having to learn this thing, like he just totally opened my mind up to, it's like he's teaching me and he's
Yeah.
adding value to our clients too. It's like the moment you feel like you can't, and I've just heard that and you telling your story, is that you didn't view anything like if you had a skill set that you couldn't adopt, you didn't view that as a detriment on yourself. You're like, who can I find around me that can help me do that, and how can I make it productive for them? That is a very good book, and it opened my mind to like there's no constraints because there's someone in the world that knows how to do that. You just have to find them and make it valuable for them and keep their needs at the
Yeah,
forefront.
right.
When it comes to hiring around your skill sets, so I want to be mindful of your time, but this is like really fascinating for me. When people are early days, were you conscious of like hiring around your skill sets? How self-aware were you around like, man, I'm not good at the data analytics
Right.
side. I think with something like that, it's more black and white where it's easier to say like, I need someone to do that.
Right.
But when it's a more gray area role, like how are you more self-aware around what the needs of the company are and, comparing that against your own skill set?
Yeah.
How do you keep that barometer?
Yeah. So I did actually go back to school at Franklin. So I left Bowling Green with a journalism degree, worked my first couple jobs. My CEO came to me one day, asked me to analyze a balance sheet, and I had no idea what she was talking about. So I went
Mhm.
to Franklin, enrolled in their MBA program. The most valuable thing I learned there was the tactical finance stuff, and I couldn't do my job without learning that.
Mm.
The second most valuable, though, is they spent a lot of time focusing on like Myers-Briggs, HBD, the stuff that kind of predated Strength Finders, but those same kind of tools that help you understand what you're strong at and what
Mhm.
you're not. There was at least one whole class, maybe two. We did readings on it. We did all the assessments. It was so eye-opening, and mine is not balanced at all, as you may expect. Like
Mhm.
it's way over indexed on making connections and liking beyond people. It's terrible around like process and analysis. I
Mhm.
mean, I'm like severely deficient here and then very high here in
Mhm.
any test I've taken. So I've started every business I've done, every endeavor I've done. The first thing I've done is hire someone that over indexes on that other side to balance. And I just heard this analogy yesterday. We talked about podcasts. This was on Business Wars, which is one of my favorites.
Mhm.
They said there's times you need the cowboy, there's times you need the sheriff. And
Mhm.
so the cowboy, he shoots at a bunch of things. He's wandering the streets. He's stealing cows. He's drinking. He's gambling. He makes a ton of mistakes, but eventually he hits that royal flush or that blackjack or robs
Mhm.
the bank or whatever. Something great happens because he just won't quit. The sheriff comes along and he provides prosperity by bringing law and order. And it's like, that's really good. And, I've heard like visionary and integrator. There's a lot of analogies. I
Yeah.
really like that one. Maybe because I like Westerns. I don't know. But so I looked for a sheriff. So Sam, who is our president, he and I couldn't be more different in our view of the world. He's the guy that can sit down and really look to determine what our tax strategy should be or what the best benefits
Mm.
package is or where people should sit in the office. If someone comes to me and doesn't like where they sit, it's like, I don't know what to do. Like, I don't really care. And I'd sit on the floor. Like
Mhm.
to me, stuff like that for myself doesn't matter. I know it matters to them and I want to help them. But
Yeah.
for me, I would never consider if I literally worked in a broom closet at Futurity for more than a year because I was like, I didn't care where I worked. And so it was a broom closet with no windows or ventilation, but
Mhm.
I just liked what I was doing.
Mhm.
So understanding that weakness of that. And if you look at our management team, and we have an advisory board and they've made this observation. I have probably over indexed on people that balance me that are super process driven, logical, analytical, highly focused, high attention, high capacity for deep attention and deep focus because I know like that's all the stuff I'm not good at. So the
Mhm.
tactical stuff, you're right, is obvious. I can't do data insights. I can't build dashboards. I can't build large language models. That stuff's obvious. When I talk to aspiring entrepreneurs, some are very self-aware, but a lot of times I will say like, are you the cowboy or the sheriff, or do you stare at the step or do you step up the stairs or do you, visionary? I explain these things. And a lot of them say I think I'd be really good at both.
Mhm.
And I can tell you the thousands of people I've worked with, there are probably two people I know that have been good at both. That could be a
Yeah.
visionary and execute. Some are good at both. Some are great at both and terrible at the other. Some are terrible at both. But I can think of, like I said, two people that could like have a vision and execute on it. So to me, those entrepreneurs are probably just not self-aware yet. And I
Yeah.
recommend tools like this, like see where do you get your energy from? What really drives you? Because I would argue, product market fit is why businesses fail. Cash flow is why business fails. I would say number three is that the lack of a well-rounded team. I would literally
Mhm.
take an HBDI or a Myers-Briggs quadrant and say like, I'm going to hire an analyst. I'm going to hire a process person. I'm going to hire a visionary. I'm going to hire a relationship person.
Mhm.
Those are my first four hires. And I would do that. That's exactly what, I've done. And when I advise startups now,
Mm.
I do the same thing. I will map out like, okay, this guy's clearly the visionary. She's clearly the relationship person. They're really missing a deep analytics person or a deep process person.
Mm.
And then helping to fill that out.
Mm. Yeah, that's really I think especially people who get into it the first time, they have trouble taking the business lens on what they do because it's a lot of times it's just them. And that's like what
Right.
I've been so far is like when you get all this head trash around what it is your own business where you just don't and that's what I've done for the last 18 months as I record this thing called a monthly retro, where I literally just look at
Oh,
profit
yes,
loss.
yeah,
Yeah.
I've seen some of the summaries of yeah,
Thanks. Yeah. But that's like the objective. You just have to be objective with it when you're so emotional and you're so emotionally invested
yeah,
in this. It's like, okay, where did leads come from? Profit loss.
yep,
Just do basic
yep,
accounting. It's like, okay, if there's numbers in front of me, then I can, remove myself from
yeah,
what I tell myself is most productive. It's like there's inputs and there's outputs. You have to just make it as simple as possible.
yes.
Um, but dude, this is it's been the highlight of my day, man. I want to be, like I said, mindful of your time because I value it a ton. But the last thing I want to ask you is like, what are you like investing heavily in now? Like, I know I asked you like what you're excited about and what drives you now, but is there anything that you are like really kind of putting all your chips in now as your big focus? And what do you kind of see for the future of whether Futurity or Bill as a whole?
Yeah, yeah, I think a lot of the focus now is everyone's talking about AI, and it's cliche, and I think we are in a bubble. I think there's a lot of overvalue there, like hype there. I think the value is going to come from it's going to allow small businesses and mid-sized businesses to have some of the leverage that only larger businesses have. So we're still focusing on enterprise deals. We're still focusing on big clients, but and again, I won't do a shameless plug, but tools like our platform, HUCKLE, things like that. That's the data that you had to be a P&G or a Nike to have that level of consumer data. Now you can get it for $50 a month.
Hmm.
What I think you and I are both seeing, we talked about this before the record button was hit. You have people later in their career getting laid off and they're becoming entrepreneurs. You have people early in their career deciding maybe college isn't for them and they're becoming entrepreneurs. And the tools that they have now, um, as you said, it's much easier to start a business. You can get paychecks, you can get Gusto, you can do your Secretary of State filing online. Like all the administrative stuff of starting a business is much easier now. And now the suite of tools to do, whether it's data analysis, email, it's this democratization of creating opportunity. So as much as a few minutes ago I said, I think we're in this K-shaped economy where there's like tremendous wealth being created and then a group getting left behind. I think the turnaround is going to be how do you enable that prosperity and wealth and equity across people who are kind of in this downward bubble. So a lot of the work we're doing at Futurity is really how do we democratize services that if you can't pay Deloitte and you can't license Experian data, like how do we provide that same level of service to a smaller mid-sized business to allow them to compete?
Hmm.
And I think we're going to see that. I think we're going to see this growing class of small and mid-sized businesses do very, very well competing against gargantuan companies and kind
Hmm.
of these enterprise companies. And so what we're focused on at Future is like how do we empower that next generation of great companies and businesses?
Awesome. Well, man, um, where can people get? Like I said, this is I won't spend too much time hyping you up because I could go on all day. But just from an entrepreneur standpoint, like I said, I've spent the last several years meeting a lot of people. Have never heard anything less than an incredible word uttered about you from everyone that I've met. And I follow, I follow you pretty closely on LinkedIn. You're very good at telling stories in person as you are on that platform. So I encourage all the listeners to go and follow you on LinkedIn and learn from your firsthand stories. Keep up to date with everything that you're doing. But if people want to get in touch, where else can they go?
Yeah. So LinkedIn's, I'm on there all the time. So great place to connect. I'll connect with anyone there. Our website is futurity.com. Huckle Insights is the software platform. I'm easy to get a hold of. Would love to connect with your listeners.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. This is great. And same thing. I admire what you've done. I love reading your posts. I think you're transparent, you're honest, you're genuine. We need more people out there, more voices like you out there. So thanks for what you're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate